road projects.
In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Just ask members to take their seats quickly and quietly. I'd like to inform the House that present in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery today is Her Excellency Ms Caroline Kennedy, the Ambassador of the United States of America. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. Questions without notice, and I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 30th of April this year, the Prime Minister said Australians would be, and I quote, better off under a Labor government. The budget confirms that a typical family will be $2,000 worse off by Christmas, with inflation, the tax burden, power prices and unemployment all forecast to go up under your budget. Can the Prime Minister explain how a $2,000 hit to family budgets makes Australians better off?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, of course, I reject the premise of the question, in which the Leader of the Opposition has simply made up figures. But what he said in April was this.
The member for Hume will cease interjecting.
On the 5th of April, the Leader of the Opposition said, and also the headwinds. I mean, inflation is very high in the United States, and we have to be, again, realistic about what's happening economically over the coming years. On the 3rd of May, he went on to say, nobody wants to see interest rates go up, but it's a reality of a world where there's inflation. I think Australians understand that. There's a lot of pressure, upward pressure on interest rates at the moment. The Shadow Treasurer said, we're facing circumstances in what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia that were not expected and very hard to predict. These pressures are driven by extenuating circumstances. So I had a lot to say about the difficulties that Australia is facing due to the global impact, which is a global inflationary pressure that is seeing central banks around the world with the fastest and most consistent tightening of monetary policy that we have seen in many decades. What last night's responsible budget handed down by the Treasurer did was to have fiscal policy work in partnership with monetary policy rather than against it, because we make no apologies for the fact that we have brought in responsible measures, including responsible measures on cost of living, cheaper childcare, and those opposite aren't quite sure of whether they're against that or for that. They never did it. Cheaper medicine, but they never did either. Cheaper medicine, the first cut to the pharmaceutical benefit scheme in 75 years since the Labor government introduced it. Expanding paid parental leave to 6 months, making more affordable housing, working with the private sector, working with state and territory governments to deliver more affordable housing. And importantly, getting wages moving again. People might remember during the election campaign me standing up day after day with a $1 coin, which is what we said the minimum wage should be increased by. Those opposite opposed it, said it was reckless, said it was loose. Remember that? It was loose economic policy to argue that people on the minimum wage, the heroes of the pandemic, should get a pay increase of just $1 an hour. The Australian people judged you in May for the hypocrites and hopeless economic managers that you are. And you've learnt nothing in the days, weeks and months since.
Prime Minister's time has expired. I give the call to the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How does the Albanese Labor government's first budget help to build a better future for Australia?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Hawke for his question about the budget last night. We're really proud of the budget that we handed down last night. The first budget of the Albanese Labor government. And in uncertain times, what the budget did was it recognised that when you've got all this global uncertainty right around the world, your best defence is a good, solid, responsible, sensible budget at home. But the budget does more than batten down the hatches against global uncertainty. It also begins to back in families and to build a better future for this country. Our 5-point cost of living relief plan, $7.5 billion, cheaper childcare, extension of paid parental leave, cheaper medicines, a housing accord for more affordable housing and to get wages moving again. But in addition to that cost of living plan, delivered in the most responsible way that we could so that we're not adding extra pressure to inflation, was our plan to grow the economy and to strengthen the economy to make it stronger, more resilient and more modern. And absolutely central to that is investing in the capacity of our people, the capabilities of our people. And that's why our investments in fee-free TAFE and more university places are so important. It's why our investments in cleaner and cheaper energy are so important. It's why our investments in a future made in Australia and our National Reconstruction Fund are so important, because that's how we strengthen the economy, by diversifying it, by investing in our industries and creating new, secure, well-paid jobs. So right across the board, Mr Speaker, the budget that I handed down from this dispatch box last night was all about building a better future for Australians and going about it in the most responsible way. Because if we had continued down the path set by those opposite, we'd be up for another decade of wage stagnation and skills and labour shortages, a crisis in aged care, energy policy chaos and $1 trillion with nowhere near enough to show for it. So what we were able to do last night was to begin to lay the foundations for a more resilient economy and a more responsible budget.
Bowman.
We're proud of the budget that we handed down last night. We're proud of the response that we've had so far, and the hard work of cleaning up the mess left by those opposite will continue.
Order. There is far too much noise. I want to hear these questions in silence, and I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Before the election, the Prime Minister promised that if he was elected, power prices would drop by $275. Last night, the Prime Minister's budget said power prices would rise by more than 50%. Given the Prime Minister often references his Bachelor of Economics degree, can he advise the House how it is possible to have prices rise by more than 50% but fall by $275 at the same time?
Order. The House will come to order. I heard the question in silence. I'd like to hear the answer as well. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the cheapest form of new energy in this country is renewables. That is something that is recognised by the Business Council of Australia, something that's recognised by the Australian Industry Group, something that's recognised by the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, it's recognised by the National Farmers Federation, but apparently is beyond the capacity of those opposite to recognise. For a decade we have suffered from the fact that we had 22 different energy policies announced and none of them landed. Even when they went through the Liberal Party room, not once but twice, they still didn't land. In fact, they so detested the idea of landing an energy policy, when it looked like being landed, they instead lopped off a Prime Minister instead. Not once but twice. Not once but twice. Twice. And they ended up with the member for Cook. They ended up with the member for Cook. It turned out one of the hidden figures in the last budget was the member for Cook.
Order.
One of the hidden figures in the last budget was the member for Cook.
And I will hear the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. It was a tight question.
Thank you. You resume your seat. Order. You may resume your seat. Thank you. The question was a broad question around power prices dropping and rising. I'm going to give the call to the Prime Minister, who is in order. I give the call to the Prime Minister. If the Leader of the Opposition can cease interjecting and the House will come to order, the Prime Minister will continue.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition.
I've got plenty of time, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition. I've given the courtesy. I've given the courtesy and made it clear I want to hear these questions in silence, and out of respect for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, ensured the House could hear the question. I think it's entirely reasonable to allow the Prime Minister to answer the question in the same circumstances. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. 22 policies announced, none of them landed. An energy grid built for the last century.
The member for Fairfax.
The shadow minister interjects. The energy prices went down under the former government. Really? Really? Wow.
Order. The House will come to order.
Absolutely extraordinary. Indeed, so bad was it going that the Shadow Treasurer changed the law so that the price increase that was built in and should have been declared in March wasn't declared until after the election. That's how bad it was going. That's how bad it was going. But during their time in office, we saw 4 gigawatts of capacity leave the grid and 1 gig go in. Now, the old supply-demand that you do sort of talk about a bit in an economics degree, supply-demand. If you go 4 gigs out and 1 gig in, do you have more energy or less energy?
The Prime Minister's
more or less.
time
and do you
has
think that
expired.
has an impact?
The Prime Minister's time has expired. I give the call that the Prime Minister's time has expired. Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What are some of the challenges facing the economy, and how does the Albanese Labor government's budget respond to those challenges?
We give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member not just for her question but all of the incredibly important work that she does in our team. Look, Mr Speaker, Australians understand that while our economy is growing, the challenges facing the economy are growing as well. And the budget that we handed down last night was framed against the backdrop of a serious deterioration in the global economy, global energy and price shocks in particular, and damaging and devastating natural disasters here at home as well. And people can see the impact that that's having on the cost of living in particular, but also, of course, on energy prices. Now, these pressures are primarily coming at us from around the world, but we understand that they're felt most acutely around the kitchen table. And that's why inflation, which is higher than we would like, for longer than we would like, is the primary influence on the budget that I handed down from this dispatch box last night. And that's what makes it so absolutely crucial that the budget that we handed down was a responsible budget and right for the times, but also at the same time readies us for a better future. Now, the best evidence of the responsible approach that we took to the budget is that when we got the substantial and very welcome boost to revenues in the near term from higher commodity prices, we returned that boost to the budget. 99% of the temporary revenue boost in the budget over the next 2 years was returned to the budget to help rebuild our buffers against global uncertainty and also to ensure that there's less debt in our budget than there was in the last budget presented by those opposite over the forward estimates. So we returned 99% of it over 2 years, we returned 92% over 4 years. On average, our predecessors returned about 40% of these temporary upgrades. Real spending growth in the budget averages 0.3% over the forward estimates. Now, the member for Hume was on Insiders on Sunday and he's asked what was the test for the budget, and he said that real spending growth had to be lower than real economic growth. Well, we passed that test with flying colours. 0.3% real spending growth in the budget, and that's much less than growth in the economy. Now, we've made hard decisions for hard times in this budget. $22 billion in savings and $6.5 billion in tax changes mean $28.5 billion in budget improvements. $22 billion in savings. We looked in the last budget from the former member for Kooyong and we couldn't find $1 of savings on the expenditure side, and so that's the difference. So what we released last night, Mr Speaker, was a responsible budget. The defining feature was spending restraint in the budget when we've got this inflation challenge. A responsible budget, distinguished and defined by its restraint. That's why those opposite don't recognise it.
I'm looking in the end corner of the room. Order. I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, will you commit to an urgent review of the petroleum resource rent tax to close loopholes and prevent multinational tax avoidance and deliver to the Australian people a fair share of the revenue from extracted Australian national resources? This could then fund the rapid electrification of households needed to reduce emissions and deliver up to $5,000 in much-needed cost-of-living savings per year per household.
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Warringah for her question. I do understand and appreciate, and I respect, that the member for Warringah has had a view about the PRRT and about the taxation of resources, particularly when we're seeing these quite extraordinary prices for gas in our economy. Our focus when it comes to the gas market is building on the good work of Minister King, who has guaranteed more supply into the market, is to work with other colleagues, Minister King, Minister Husic, Minister Bowen and others, to now turn our attention to the Code of Conduct and to see if there's something meaningful we can do on the price side of the equation as well. Now, I understand that there are a number of people in the community, a lot of people who I respect, who have called for us to dial up somehow the PRRT. My predecessor, the former member for Kooyong, Josh Frydenberg, and I've been kind to him about this because I think it was the right step, began some work in the Commonwealth Treasury about the taxation of gas in the PRRT. And what the Treasury did was they began that work. There was an initial report. Josh Frydenberg took some initial steps, but the work was paused while the department, for good and understandable reasons, focused on the COVID response. That work is in the process of restarting. We have said that it's not something that we're focused on. Our focus is on the regulatory side, on prices and the Code of Conduct and some of those other issues. But obviously, if and when the Treasury completes that work, I'll take their advice seriously.
Before I call the member for Canberra, I'd like to inform the House that present in the gallery today are a group of First Nations students participating in the Work Exposure in Government program. These students have come from all around Australia to learn about career opportunities in the public service. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you all and I hope you're enjoying your day learning about careers in Parliament House. I look forward to meeting you after question time. I give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering for women?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Canberra for her question, and hello to all the students up there that we had breakfast together this morning. I really hope you're enjoying your stay and enjoying question time. The Albanese Labor government believes in women, and the budget last night absolutely proved the issues that we have, or the respect we have for equity, for diversity and for fairness. There will be cheaper childcare. In fact, there will be $4.7 billion of cheaper childcare that will make childcare more affordable for 97% of Australian families. We've expanded the paid parental leave scheme to 26 weeks, and it also applies to single-parent families, and that is an extraordinary contribution to the life of families in this country, and in particular to the participation of women in the workforce. And we will provide greater flexibility for families to ensure the parental paid leave system works in ways that is best for them. It's not up to government to decide that. It's up to families to work out the ways that it is best for them. We are going to invest $1.7 billion in women's safety initiatives, including $170 million for 500 frontline community workers to support women and children experiencing domestic violence. I know that the Leader of the Opposition has a particular interest in this particular cause, and I respect him for that. These are all policies in our first budgets, policies that are good for women, good for families and good for our economy. Australia should not rank 43rd in the World Economic Forum Global Gender Index, Gap Index, out of 146 countries. That is shameful, and we need to move that. We have a gender pay gap of 14% in this country, and we know absolutely that gender equality is a key factor behind the issue of gender-based violence. The tragic stories that we all saw on Four Corners earlier in the weeks absolutely underscores this terrible inequity. That's why we will develop a standalone First Nations national plan to tackle gender-based violence for Indigenous women, and that will be led by the work of Minister Rishworth in terms of her responsibility. I am proud, absolutely proud, to be part of this government.
And on indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to join in acknowledging the comments, the very important comments made by the Minister. Firstly, in welcoming the students who are here today. A very important part of our process here is to welcome students and to involve them in the workings of the parliament. That's very important. But on the substantive issue that the Minister raised, there is a bipartisan position of support for all of these issues. There is no tolerance in our country whatsoever for violence or discrimination against women or on the basis of gender at all. And many of the programs, particularly over COVID, given the mental health impacts, the domestic violence surge that took place resulted in us putting additional funding in place, and many of those programs have been continued by the government in this budget, and we commend them for that. The work in increasing participation and around PPL, we've made comments of support in relation to that as well. So on behalf of the Coalition, we commend the government for that work within the budget, and particularly, I might say, to the Minister on the work that needs to take place in Alice Springs in particular. I was there last week. It is a national tragedy, and it cannot be allowed to continue. For young women, for young girls, for elders, women that we spoke to in the community, equally horrified as any Australian is. And we absolutely stand shoulder to shoulder, and I've spoken with the Prime Minister about what we can do more to address this scourge in society. So I'm very pleased to be able to lend support and words of support to the Minister's very worthy remarks.
And I give the call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Treasurer. A short time ago, the Treasurer was asked whether Australians can expect $275 off their power bills. He said, yep, it's in the budget. Page 57 of the budget says prices will increase by 20% this year and 30% next year. What page refers to a reduction of $275?
I give the call. Order. The Shadow Treasurer was heard in silence. I wish to hear the Treasurer in silence. I give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Speaker. I'm pleased to get this question from the Shadow Treasurer, really for two reasons. First of all, is because it does give me the opportunity to explain to the House and to explain to the relevant journalist who asked me the question that I misheard the question at the National Press Club. And I say about that I was temporarily blinded by the vast influence, of Charles Croucher having inherited this remarkable position of power in this building from Laurie Oakes and Chris Uhlmann. And I say, as I said to Charles when I rang him straight after the press club, I rang Charles and I rang Laura Tingle and I said, I thought you were asking me a different question. I misheard it and I answered a different question. And so I say again to Charles, who's in the gallery, through you, Mr Speaker, I misheard his question and I am genuinely grateful, for once, to the member for Hume for the opportunity to talk about this. Now, the other reason, Mr Speaker—
The member for Hume will cease interjecting.
The other reason, Mr Speaker, that I am genuinely delighted to get this question from the member for Hume on energy prices is because—
the Treasurer will resume his seat. Order. The Treasurer is not halfway through his answer, but I will hear from the member for Petrie.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance. A minute 17. How long is the preamble that he gets?
Resume your seat. The Treasurer is referring directly to what he was asked about. That is not a point of order. I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I reassure the member for Petrie that my answer is not going to be about the Shadows Treasurer's history of doctoring documents. My answer is going to be about energy prices. He asked me about energy prices.
Groom will cease interjecting.
Now, I pay tribute to the Opposition Tactics Committee, who decided on today of all days that the matter of public importance today will be the Shadow Treasurer talking about energy prices. When I got given this by my office, I couldn't believe my eyes, Mr Speaker. The guy who's got his fingerprints all over this energy policy chaos that we've inherited, the guy who is more responsible than anyone else in this building for the fact that we've had this wasted decade which has given us energy policy chaos, has the nerve to ask us a question about energy prices. This is the guy that gave us the wasted decade of missed opportunities with electricity market chaos, and now that we've got this war in Ukraine, our energy markets are more vulnerable than they should be because of the rank incompetence of the Shadow Treasurer. Now, we've spoken in this place before, Mr Speaker, about the sense of humour that the Opposition Tactics Committee has in giving the Shadow Treasurer questions on energy prices. Before, when everybody jumped at the same time to ask a question and you didn't give a call to the Shadow Treasurer, the biggest sigh of relief came from over there, because he has got his fingerprints all over this energy policy crisis. He hid an energy price increase from the Australian people during the election, and they won't forget it.
The member for Groom has been continually interjecting. He is warned. Give the call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How will the Albanese Labor government's first budget make medicines cheaper and impact on the lives of Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Ageing.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my friend the member for Moreton for his question, because I know he appreciates that last night the Treasurer delivered a budget that invested $9.9 billion in new health and aged care measures to strengthen Medicare, to restore dignity to aged care, being led by my friend and colleague Minister Wells, to cut the cost of medicines, to rebuild the health and aged care workforce, and to strengthen First Nations health as well, beginning the long task of cleaning up the mess that was left to us by the Liberal Party, a job that every modern Labor government has had to do over the last 50 years in the area of health. A centrepiece of this investment, Mr Speaker, delivered the biggest cut to the cost of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, bringing the maximum co-payment for general patients down from $42.50 to just $30, putting $190 million every year back into the pockets of hard-working Australians. And, Mr Speaker, this responsible cost of living relief could not happen at a better time than this. Leanne wrote to me yesterday and said, "At the moment I pay over $150 each and every month for medication I need to be on. Thank you, Albo. This will make a big difference to me." Lucy, a pharmacist, wrote. She said, "Thank you for making medicines more affordable. As a pharmacist, it's difficult a conversation to have with patients when they can't afford the treatment that they need." And Leanne, or Janine, wrote, "Thanks, Albo. My family spend a few $100s every month on scripts, and this will definitely make a difference." Mr Speaker, this relief builds on a range of other measures introduced in our short 5 months in government to cut the cost of medicines and to list new medicines on the PBS. Just a few months ago, in early July, the safety net threshold for pensioners and concession card holders was slashed by 25%, meaning across the year those millions of Australians know that they'll pay no more than $4.70 every week for all of their medicines needs. Last month, the price of more than 2,000 individual medicines was cut, putting another $130 million back in the pockets of hard-working Australians. And, Mr Speaker, as all members know, today this House again reaffirmed our promise to extend cheaper medicines to more self-funded retirees. Our legislation to extend the Seniors Health Card to more than 50,000 additional self-funded retirees will see their medicines bills plummet. Cutting the cost of medicines, Mr Speaker, is not just good for their hip pocket, it's good for the health of millions and millions of Australians. And these responsible measures introduced by the Treasurer's budget last night will make a real difference to millions of Australians.
Give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank
Members
you,
on my right,
Mr Speaker, and my question goes to the Treasurer, and it follows his response to the former question, where he explained his proclivity for mishearing questions. My question is, has the Treasurer and has the Prime Minister also misheard questions to which they responded with a promise of a reduction of household power bills by $275, where they made that commitment no less than 97 times?
Order. Time has expired. You may resume your seat, member for Fairfax. You have asked your question. I give the order. The House will come to order. Members on my right, the Minister for Industry. I give the call to the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, I know that we're supposed to take these characters seriously, but some days when they ask us about energy prices, it's just too difficult. Now, Mr Speaker, I do confess that when you have ears as big as mine and you say that you misheard something, I know that people might doubt that, but it's the truth. And I rang Charles immediately after and I explained to him what happened. Now that I have fessed up to mishearing a question at the National Press Club, it's time for you to fess up in your role in energy policy chaos.
The Treasurer will just pause. I'm going to hear the Leader of the Opposition. We're barely into the question, but I'll hear his point of order.
Mr Speaker, it's on relevance. Pensioners and families heard this government say on 97 occasions.
You may resume your seat. The Leader of the Opposition cannot be heard. Order. Members on my right. The Leader of the House has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. 2 points. First of all, the question in which it was asked, almost anything could be in order in the way that question was asked. And secondly, I refer to your earlier rulings where points of order have been taken by the Leader of the Opposition where it was clearly intended to participate in debate rather than to take a point of order, and just refer to that earlier ruling.
I thank the Leader of the House, and I want to make it clear, points of order on relevance must be stated. It is not an opportunity to ask the question again, to ask additional information, to give statements. Both the manager, the deputy and the leader have extra responsibilities in that area. If it continues, the points of order will not be heard. I want to be very clear to the House. I'll give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are three facts about what's going on in energy markets. First of all, renewable energy is cheaper energy. That remains the case. Second of all, there's a war in Europe which is causing havoc in energy markets and pushing up electricity prices. And thirdly, the energy policy chaos brought to us by the dregs of the former government over there have made things harder rather than easier for us to deal with it.
We'll give the call to the member for Corwell.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to address the supply of new housing in Australia to ensure more Australians have access to an affordable and secure home?
We'll give the call to the Minister for Small Business, Minister for Housing and Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Cornwall for her important question. She, like many people in this place, know that far too many Australians don't have a safe, affordable place to call home, and that we all should be doing more. And that's what we saw in last night's budget from the Treasurer. The Albanese Labor government is committed to addressing the cost of living pressures by making housing more affordable. Last night's announcement of a once-in-a-generation housing accord, agreed by each tier of government, by investors and industry, is a national commitment to work together to address the systematic problems in the housing market. We know that by working together is the only way to get this done. We need all three tiers of government using the levers available to invest in more affordable housing right across the country. Indeed, our National Housing Accord is an aspiration from 2024 to deliver 1 million new homes in 5 years. 1 million new homes. Homes for more Australians to have a safe, affordable place to call home. It will deliver $350 million to 10,000 new affordable homes. And this will be matched by the states and territories for a further 10,000. So that's an additional 20,000 affordable homes, and that comes on top of our election commitments that we have already announced. The Housing Australia Future Fund, 30,000 social and affordable homes right across the country. And of course our Housing Supply and Affordability Council will play an important role as part of the Housing Accord, working with the tiers of government, particularly the state governments and the federal government, about what additional levers need to be used to get more supply on the ground faster. And indeed, the Accord will help drive private investment, including from superannuation funds, to get more homes on the ground sooner. And of course, this builds on our incentives to get more people into their own home with a Help to Buy program, the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee, and of course our recent announcement coming out of the Jobs and Skills Summit to widen the remit of the National Infrastructure Facility to unlock $575 million for more social and affordable housing sooner. So we want to unlock the NIF to get more houses on the ground now. Then we've got the Housing Australia Future Fund with investment returns coming in the second half of next year. And then we've got the Housing Accord, more affordable homes across the country for 2024. This is a systematic reform to housing in this country. It is showing leadership for the first time in a long time from a federal government. It is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get this right, and we will work to get it right so that more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home.
Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the government's budget decision to cut supply development funding to the Cooper and Ada Vale basins. By how many gigajoules will this reduce domestic gas supply, and will this increase domestic gas prices further beyond the 40% increase locked in the budget?
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank very much the Leader of the National Party for his question, and I will make some comments and then refer to the Minister for Energy. The fact is that earlier on, what we had was a position put that somehow prices went down for energy during the former government's reign. That's what they said. That's what they said. So I was actually able to get the 2019 policy of those opposite that they took to the election. And it said a re-elected Morrison government will be targeting a 25% reduction in the average wholesale electricity price by the end of 2021, with new supply through our Underwriting New Generation initiative. That's what they said. That was the commitment that they made, and the member opposite, who's been given responsibility for this area, had interjected across, saying that indeed prices went down.
The Prime Minister will pause, and I will hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, previously you've said that a minister or a Prime Minister can have a preamble. He's had his preamble on something that's not relevant to the question, which is quite specific.
Resume your seat. Just remind the Manager, if he's rising on a point of order, as I said about 5.5 minutes ago, you must state the point of order, not just start rambling. Can I give the call to the Prime Minister? Order. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister, who was answering the question.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, at May 2019, the average wholesale price was $84.25. In May 2022, it was $286.18. So an increase higher of $201.93. So instead of their commitment that they went to the election on during the last term of a 25% reduction, it was a 240% increase. A 240% increase on their watch. And when you go into the detail, about supply, you get to underwriting investment in new reliable power generation to improve competition, including Battery of the Nation. Battery of the Nation. Well, Battery of the Nation was signed off last week by myself and the Energy Minister. They had a policy that they said would decrease by 25%. It went up by 240%.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
They said it would be driven by projects that they didn't deliver, that we are delivering in partnership with the Tasmanian Liberal government.
And I invite the Minister for Energy and Climate Change.
I better be quick, Mr Speaker, because the Prime Minister did such a comprehensive job. Because we are reprioritising the wasteful spending of those opposite, including the alleged fraudulent gas-led recovery that the member for Hume claimed existed. And we have abolished his UNGI program because it didn't deliver a megawatt, a gigawatt, a kilowatt or a watt. And left the Australian people saying, what was that about?
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting so I can hear the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Social Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's budget deliver cost of living support for new parents? How will the policy change help Australian families?
I give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, I'd like to thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question, because she's long been an advocate of extending paid parental leave, and I am so pleased that the Albanese government is delivering the biggest expansion to paid parental leave since Labor introduced it in 2011. And by increasing the amount of the government paid leave to 6 months by 2026, we are providing responsible cost of living relief to more Australian families. Our investment supports both parents to take more paid time out of work to care for their children, taking pressure off household budgets. Not only will it help families to better balance work and care, but it will also support participation and productivity, providing an economic dividend to the Australian economy. And I am pleased that our changes have been widely welcomed across family groups, gender advocate groups, employers and unions alike. The ACT said that the increase to 26 weeks was a great step forward for Australian parents, particularly working women. Jennifer Westacott from the Business Council of Australia said the expansion doesn't just help make our society fairer, but is also a major economic reform that will help raise workforce participation and boost productivity. The Parenthood said that this is a significant improvement after no meaningful change to the policy over the last decade. Minderoo's Thrive by 5 Foundation said the government's changes will benefit parents, infants, employers, employees and the Australian economy. And of course, Sam Mostyn, President of Chief Executive Women, welcomed this much-needed expansion. Our changes are pretty significant. They make our paid parental leave more modern, more flexible and, of course, extend it. One of the key changes means that all parents can access government paid leave at the same time as their employer paid leave. Under the current scheme, this is not available to recipients of dad and partner pay. And the reason for this is members on this side of the House want to encourage families to get the support they need from both government and their employers. And I hope that those opposite will support all changes of our paid parental leave, all elements including this one. Because, of course, it wasn't long ago that those opposite, when they were in government, accused mothers who wanted to take both government leave and their employer leave of being frauds, of being double dippers, of being telling those women they were rorters. This was a terrible attitude to take to Australian families. This side of the House takes it seriously. We seriously want to support families at the time of their newborn baby.
Give the call to the member for North Sydney.
My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. In last night's budget, the government outlined the pressures Australians are under following the multiple crises, COVID, natural disasters, as well as forecasting the dire cost of living pressures to come. Indeed, in the past year alone, 2 million Australians have accessed Medicare-funded psychology sessions. Can the Minister please explain to us and to those in the community who need mental health support why the budget did not include an extension of the vital additional 10 Medicare-funded psychology sessions, which will now expire at the end of December?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for North Sydney for her question and for her deep understanding and engagement in health policy in her time in this parliament. As the member pointed out, for some time there has been an additional 10 sessions available under the Better Access program under Medicare as part of the COVID response, and that has been taken up quite substantially across the country. We included $2.6 billion in last night's budget for COVID measures that will take us up to the 31st of December by and large. That includes the extension of the COVID National Partnership Agreement that the Prime Minister concluded with Premiers and Chief Ministers at his first National Cabinet meeting, a range of other measures going to the need to replenish the national medical stockpile. But a range of measures beyond the 31st of December are still being considered by the government, and arrangements for better access in 2023 are one of those measures about which we will have more to say in coming weeks. The government is considering that and a number of other COVID measures that currently expire on the 31st of December. Many of them were intended to expire on the 30th of June or 30th of September under arrangements put in place by the former government. But I'm very alive to the views of the APS, the Psychological Society, about this, about patients, about the current better access arrangements. We're looking at it very deeply in terms of what will be in place for 2023. More broadly, in relation to better access, can I say that there is, as I'm sure the member is aware, underway an evaluation that was commenced by the former government, as was appropriate. The last deep evaluation of the Better Access program hadn't taken place for more than 10 years. The final report on Better Access is not due until probably December, maybe a bit after that, and we'll have a look at longer-term arrangements in relation to Better Access in light of that very deep evaluation, which I know has had very strong support in the sector. But can I assure the member that in relation to the 10 additional sessions that were put in place as part of the COVID response, we are looking at that closely, along with a range of other COVID measures that currently expire on the 31st of December. GP respiratory clinics, a number of others are in that category, and we'll have more to say about that in coming weeks. And I'd certainly welcome a further discussion with the member about her perspective on this.
Give the call to the member for Macnamara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Why is Labor's plan for cheaper childcare so important?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I thank my friend, the member for Macnamara, for the question? The short answer is because the cost of childcare has gone up by 41% in the last 8 years. 41% under the Liberals and the Nationals. That's the truth. Childcare is expensive. Any mum or dad with a child in childcare knows that. And that makes it a massive roadblock for a lot of parents who are going back to work, who want to work more hours, work more days. For example, we know that when both parents are working, if they've got 2 or more children in childcare, one parent can lose between 80 and 100% of their take-home pay if they work a 4th or a 5th day, 80 or 100%. You think, well, why is it worth it? And not surprisingly, almost always, those parents are women. And that's why what we did in the budget last night is so important. It will cut the cost of childcare for more than 1 million Australian families, including almost 10,000 families, Mr Speaker, in your electorate, about 7,000 families in the opposition leader's electorate, about 6,000 families in the member for Macnamara's electorate. In fact, on average, about 6,000 families in every single electorate represented in this chamber. At the Jobs and Skills Summit, the head of the Grattan Institute, Danielle Wood, said, "I can't help but reflect that if untapped women's workforce participation was a massive iron ore deposit, we'd have governments lining up to give tax concessions to get it out of the ground." Well, Mr Speaker, this isn't a tax concession, but it's not welfare either. This is economic reform. It's going to help Australians, particularly Australian women, by giving them more choice, help them to be able to earn more, to retire with more. And for Australian businesses, that means more skilled workers back at work. According to Treasury, they estimate the equivalent of up to 37,000 more full-time workers in the first year alone. So it's good for children, it's good for parents, and it's good for our economy. It's why the Australian people voted for it in May. It's why we're delivering it in this budget. And not unsurprisingly, this mob opposed it for 2 years. And then yesterday at midday, they scurried in here and said they're going to vote for it, and then they proceeded to attack it again.
Will cease interjecting.
If they think it's such a bad idea, why are they voting for it? We know why. Not because they get it, not because they think it'll help children or parents or the economy. We know why they're voting for it, and they're all sitting up there.
I now give the call to the member for Groom.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer him to the over 50% increase to electricity prices in his first budget. I refer also to his $100 billion plan to roll out the energy transmission network with 28,000 kilometres and wires and poles snaking their way around the country. Will this expansion of the energy transmission network further increase electricity prices for Australian families and businesses?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Tharick. Thanks very much for Mr Speaker. I'll be seeing the New South Wales Premier later this week, and I'll convey these coalition colleagues' views about renewables and about fixing transmission, because we're working with state and territory governments to fix the mess that was created by those opposite with all of their years of inaction. And here is what a fellow colleague of those opposite had to say about this, about Marinus Link, which is about transmission, which is what you're asking about. This will renew our economy as a renewable economy. It will put downward pressure on electricity prices. Electricity prices will be lower with Marinus Link than without it. Marinus Link will help save money on people's power bills. It is a great day, a historic day. That's what Guy Barnett, the Minister for Energy and Renewables, well-known radical socialist and government interventionist, who served in the Senate as a Liberal Party senator for year after year after year, served on their front bench, has gone into the Tasmanian Parliament, is a minister, and was standing next to myself, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and the Tasmanian Premier had to say about that. But the Tasmanian Premier himself, Jeremy Rockliff, had to say this: renewable energy is absolutely 100% in Tasmania's DNA. Reliable, affordable and clean energy that will unlock billions of dollars of investment over the course of the next decade. Spoke about a renewable future. The New South Wales Premier. The issue here that New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and South Australia are dealing with now has been the ideological war when it comes to climate change and energy policy in this country that has led to a lack of private sector investment. That's what Dominic Perrottet, the New South Wales Premier, had to say. But it's not just coalition members. There's a range of good quotes from Matt Keane, so I hope you give me another one. Kerry Schott, who the coalition government appointed as the energy to look after the regulator. Just have a think about the way electricity gets dispatched. The Leader of the Opposition says Malcolm did. I've got news for you, sunshine. He was a Liberal Prime Minister and you were in his cabinet. You were in his cabinet. If you had any guts, you would have resigned if that was your view. If you had any guts, you would have resigned and not served. And not served today.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. The House will come to order.
You let Scotty through. You let Scotty through by accident.
Order. The House will come to order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting so I can hear the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help Australians deal with the cost of living by getting wages moving after a decade of stagnation?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Cunningham and acknowledge her commitment, in particular to closing the gender pay gap, which is part of getting wages moving in this country. If there was a statistic last night that really stuck out for me, and there are a lot of statistics floating around on budget night, it was this fact. Real wages are lower today than they were 10 years ago. Real wages are lower today than they were 10 years ago. That's the impact. That's the impact as a direct result of a government that deliberately wanted to keep wages low. And when you go through the occupations as to where to this day wage growth is still at its lowest. So wage growth already, you look at the inflation figure that's just come out and put that against the wage growth figure at the moment, the WPI, of 2.6%. But then look at even lower than that in particular occupations. And what do these occupations have in common? Retail trade, accommodation and food services, education and training, healthcare and social assistance. All of them low paid, all of them predominantly women. Every one of those. And that's the story of low wage growth in Australia. The Fair Work Act, when it was established, and these sections were not sought to be amended by those opposite, had always envisaged that there would be multi-employer bargaining. There were 3 different streams of bargaining dedicated to multi-employer bargaining, but they haven't worked. For example, some of the barriers that turned out on the way decisions went, early childhood workers were denied a pay rise on the basis that they couldn't compare their work to the work of engineers. Low-paid workers weren't able to enter the low-paid stream, and think of who these workers were: nurses, aged care workers and security guards weren't able to enter the low-paid stream. Now, those opposite, if you want to question whether or not multi-employer bargaining and opening it up will make a difference to getting wages moving, look no further than the quote from, and I hate that it's the same person again, the Shadow Treasurer. Because the Shadow Treasurer was asked by Laura Jays about his attitude to why they were opposed to multiple employer bargaining. And he answered this: it pushes up wages. It pushes up wages. He went on with more, saying this is a bad place to go. And by the end, he was saying this is exactly what they shouldn't be doing. Well, in terms of it having an impact on wages, it will. But if you're a government that wants to get wages moving, then these are the sorts of decisions you take, and we'll be introducing it to the parliament tomorrow.
The minister's time has expired. I give the call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Telecommunications. During the election, Labor made a number of commitments to Mayo, including $1.5 million for mobile coverage in Rapid Bay and Cuddly Creek, NBN upgrades to 20,000 Mayo homes and boosted farm connectivity. Would the Minister please provide an update with respect to these announcements?
I give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. I acknowledge her long-standing advocacy on the importance of communications right across the portfolio in her electorate. I can inform the member for Mayo that this government is delivering on all its election commitments in the communications space. That includes making sure that Australian families and businesses are better connected than ever. We have invested in this budget over $2.2 billion in regional communications, and that represents one of the most major funding boosts to regional comms since the National Broadband Network was announced. To the specific issues that the member raises, I can go through and itemise the Better Connectivity Plan for rural and regional Australia, which is an addition to the $480 million already committed to the upgrade of the fixed wireless network, which in turn improves satellite connectivity as well for those constituents of hers who may also be on the satellite network. We have committed $400 million to improve regional mobile coverage, but also harden communications networks against natural disasters. I know the member is very familiar with that. We have $200 million to run further rounds of the regional connectivity program, and that funds a broad range of place-based communications solutions. We do have $30 million to expand on-farm connectivity and drive productivity through machine-to-machine networks, which will be very keenly felt by farmers. We have $20 million for an independent audit of mobile coverage to see where the true black spots really are, so that evidence-based decisions can be made on that basis. And we also have $6 million to extend the Regional Tech Hub, which provides expert advice to regional customers on how to connect and stay connected. And of course, Mr Speaker, this is in addition to our announcement of $2.4 billion to upgrade full fibre access for 1.5 million additional premises right across Australia, and they include 660,000 premises in the regions. So this government, Mr Speaker, is committed to making sure that more than ever Australians can be connected, they can be informed, and they can experience the best improvements in productivity that can be provided through these communications investments. And I would note also, Mr Speaker, the Nationals like to talk about being the friends of the regions. There was one party that went to this last election with a policy of improving on-farm connectivity, and it was this Prime Minister who will be delivering substantial upgrades, not only in terms of connectivity, but in terms of the whole
Members on my left.
of ensuring that every Australian, irrespective of where they live, irrespective of where they work or irrespective of what they earn, have exactly the same opportunities right across the regions.
Order. Give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry. What policy changes has the Albanese Labor government made in its first budget to support Australian industry and manufacturing?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Spence for the question. I know he's particularly pleased of the $10 million budget investment we made in the Flinders University Factory of the Future, building advanced manufacturing skills in businesses and workers in the great state of South Australia. And there are a number of projects that we invested in, backing in the proud contribution of the regions to our national manufacturing effort. From the Prime Minister across the breadth of the party, we're joined in the belief that Australia should be a country that makes things. A truism underscored by what we experienced as a nation through the pandemic. The things that we needed most weren't there when we needed them, at the time we needed them the most. And we, like many nations, determined to pare back our dependence on one or two countries for our goods. So it's not just that we should be a country that makes things. Australia must be a country that makes things, backing our businesses, their workers, their great ideas, because we believe in revitalising manufacturing in the national interest. It's why you saw in last night's budget a commitment, a first down payment in our National Reconstruction Fund, where we will build capability in resources, agriculture, energy, also medical and emerging technology. And we'll put that capability to work through our Buy Australian plan, which will open up government contracts to Australian industry, all adding up to a future made in Australia. But, Mr Speaker, I couldn't help but notice last night the contrast in the delivery of the budget to what we've seen previously, because before we had a coalition treasurer stand at that dispatch box daring manufacturers to leave the country, and last night you had a Labor treasurer backing in the view that this is a place that we should do more onshore. We believe in manufacturing in the national interest. Those opposite only ever believe in it in the political interest. Look at their record. They cut programs, they goad manufacturers offshore, they then scramble to do a U-turn. 2 years ago this month, they announced a $1.5 billion manufacturing program, which in 2020 they invested nothing. In 50 Shades of Flesh.
Order. The member for the Minister for Industry withdraw that comment. We'll withdraw that comment.
I certainly withdraw.
I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, it's on relevance, Mr Speaker. He was asked about this government's plans. He couldn't go more than a minute 30 before getting into unspecified sledging and inaccurate and offensive sledging of this side of the House's record.
I uphold the point of order. The Minister was asked about policy changes, and I'm asking the Minister to return to that part of the question.
Thank you. And it is an absolute contrast, because you look at what they announced. They announced a $1.5 billion program.
Order.
Hardly did anything in 2020. Hardly did anything in 2021.
Order.
And then in the weeks before the election, 85% of those funds went out the door. 85%. It is an utter
Members
contrast.
on my left.
The only thing they're able to manufacture is a regular round of industry ministers that went right through constantly, versus what we were able to deliver. An important contrast in a commitment to manufacturing for the national interest.
Time has expired. Order. I'd like to hear the member for Durack in silence, and I'll give her the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. For nearly 6 months, the Prime Minister has refused to repeat his promise of a $275 reduction in household power bills. Now that the government's own budget papers forecast an over 50% increase in power prices, isn't it time the Prime Minister came clean with the Australian people Will the Prime Minister concede he has broken his $275 promise?
Order. Order. The member for Durack was heard in silence, and now the Prime Minister will be heard in silence. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm sure I will be. I'm very confident that I will be, because I'm asked about commitments given during election campaigns on electricity prices, and I do know about election commitments given on electricity prices.
The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
The former government that we know before the 2019 election said that a re-elected Morrison government went on to say a 25% reduction in the average wholesale electricity price. So the electricity price then was $84.25. In May of 2022, it was $286.18, an increase of $201.93. So instead of a 25% decrease, there was a 240% increase. And that doesn't take into account either the further increase that was baked in where they changed the law in order to achieve their outcome.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
The question goes to
order.
Now,
members on my left.
At that election, there were a range of commitments that they gave, none of which they delivered. The election commitment that we gave was to move to 82% renewables, was to invest in our Rewiring the Nation plan.
The member for Groom will cease interjecting.
Seriously.
The Prime Minister is talking about the election commitment, so I will hear from the Leader, from the Manager of Opposition Business, and I'll ask him to state the point of order.
Order is on relevance, Mr. Speaker.
Resume your seat. The Prime Minister was in mid-sentence talking about his election commitment, of which the question was about election commitments. And I call order. I call the Prime Minister.
It's slow. It's a long way to the dispatch box, Mr. Speaker, from over there. The first Manager of Opposition Business who's ever not sat there. The first Manager of Opposition Business who hasn't sat closest to the dispatch box. Because you don't even have support of your leader. The truth is,
members on my left.
We've established
members on my left.
A Rewiring the Nation plan.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. Members on my left, I'm issuing a general warning. Questions are heard in silence, and the answers will be heard in silence. It's not a hard concept. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Our Rewiring the Nation plan was a part of my first budget reply. It was provided for in last night's budget, and even before our first budget, we're delivering, with deals signed by Tasmania and Victoria with the Commonwealth. In some cases, in the case of the Marinus Link, a tripartite agreement between a Victorian Labor government, a Tasmanian Liberal government and the Commonwealth.
Order. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Just a reminder to the House, I do not need anyone watching the clock on my behalf. Give the call to the member for order. Give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. How is the government's budget assisting to build resilience in the Australian economy by implementing the policies which the now Prime Minister announced in his budget replies?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Macquarie for her question. And indeed, I was given the great honour of having 3 budget replies during the last term of Parliament. And every one of them I set out an alternative vision for the nation, an agenda which now we have implemented Every single commitment that we made was in the budget last night. And the first one, of course, was for cheaper childcare, one that was opposed by those opposite, one that they said was reckless, including the cap on childcare rebates. They were opposed to it. They then made a little bit of a dance down towards it, but then ended up opposing it again. And now it's before the parliament. It appears they're still opposing it. In that same plan, we put forward the Rewiring the Nation plan. Now, this wasn't a plan made up, to give credit where credit's due, by the Labor Party. It's a plan developed by the Australian Energy Market Operator based upon their Integrated Systems Plan. It's been on the website for years. People have known how to fix the energy grid and how to bring it into the 21st century. But those opposite, it was too hard for them. We put it in our first budget reply. It was in the budget last night. And the second budget reply had in it the Building Australia Future Fund, which we're built on. We not only had the provision for the 30,000 places for social and affordable housing that we'll create over 5 years through the Building Australia Future Fund. We've built on that and worked with the private sector to have our housing accord that was in the budget last night as one of the key components. As part of that, we had as well the National Reconstruction Fund, not just assisting business to transform and to become more efficient, but the creation of new businesses that make things here in Australia. And of course, we had in the last budget reply at the centre of it aged care reform, something we are now delivering on in government and legislation that's already been passed through this parliament. So the test for the opposition leader tomorrow night is to move out of the mindless negativity which he's focused on. A mob who never knew how to do anything but oppose has returned to their spiritual home on the opposition benches. They're more comfortable there, Mr Speaker. They didn't know what their last leader was up to, so how could they know what Australians are up to? How could they know what the needs of Australians are? But the test tomorrow night is twofold. What is their alternative? And the second part of that test is, if they think it's a good idea, why didn't they do it during their almost decade in office? Why didn't they do it in the almost decade in office? That's the big test for the opposition leader tomorrow night, an appropriate title for someone who opposes everything, and I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Pursuant to Parliamentary Service Act 1999, I present the annual reports for 2021-22 of the Department of Parliamentary Services and Parliamentary Budget Office. And I call the Leader of the House with papers.
Speaker, documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.